that basically the use of patents may entail in their work. The second contribution of this paper is to think about patents in the context of firm growth strategies. A few weeks ago, Song presented this very interesting lecture about the interactions between startups and incumbents. And, we went over like many different papers where you can think about how large firms may use different protective tools to deter competition from entrants or smaller firms. This paper contributes to that and in fact shows that large firms may be using their own patents as a protective tool to preempt competitors from entering their product space. So quickly, just a little bit to see where we're gonna go. I'm gonna start talking about data and the matching algorithm. That's really the core of our measurement exercise. Then I'm gonna go and describe how we look at the relationship between patents and products. And we're gonna find that there is a positive relationship, but fundamentally the majority of innovations are not related to patents. And we're gonna quantify this and gives you a little bit idea of how much of the patent value, how much seems to be incorporated in the positive signaling of actual innovation on the market. Third part, we're gonna look at, so the second part, we are doing this across the entire size distribution. The third part, we're gonna do these exercises where we look how the relationship is actually changing across the firm market leadership or firm size. We're gonna look at firms with small market share versus firms with large market share. And we're gonna document that patents of market leaders lead less to innovation, but are associated with more deterrence. And I'm gonna show how we do that. And then finally, we're gonna complement our paper with a theoretical framework where both innovation and patenting are endogenous decisions, as they should be. And what we're gonna show you is that there are very good reasons why larger firms actually may be more likely to use patents for protective reasons, right? We're gonna look at the value of innovation and the value of patenting. We're gonna show that that's the case. And we're gonna use the model to quantify the protective component of patent value and how that increases with market size. So if there's no questions about the motivation, I'm gonna go and talk about the data. Good? Okay. So let me talk about like the data that we use here. So the product data covers basically firms in the consumer packaged goods sector, firms and products in the period 2006 to 2015. So it covers products that you can see in the grocery stores, drug and general merchandise stores. So these are point of sales retail locations that collect this information, then we gather this. What is unique about this data is that we are able to measure product characteristics and also their performance. We can see their sales and prices, and this we'll see quite important in our paper. We're gonna define products as barcodes, which is the most disaggregated level of product that you can have. And then we're gonna group those barcodes into things that we're gonna call product categories that fundamentally are sets of similar barcodes. So think about, lamps versus detergents versus shaving razors, okay? We're gonna, with the product data, construct measures of innovation. So the simplest measure will be simply looking at new products introduced by a firm in a particular product category in a time period, okay? But as you may expect, many barcodes will be associated with really just minor changes relative to other products that are offered in the market, right? And so the key here is that we're gonna build measures that will adjust for that. They are quality adjusted or novelty adjusted. And how we do that? Well, we're gonna use information on the product characteristics, where we can identify when there are new product characteristics offering the market that wasn't offered before. And we're gonna then create a measure that weights by how important is those new product characteristics the weighting of the product characteristics, we're going to use hedonic price regressions because we want to think about what is the value to the consumer of the different product attributes. Okay. So about the patent data. So patent data is fairly standard. We use the USPTO covering data from 75 to 2017. We're going to use patent applications and then look at various standard measures of patents. We also going to use the text of the patent, and I'm going to describe, we're going to do it later. So, you know, having product data in one side and patent data in the other, then now the key is that how can we link, how can we merge this? So we're going to have two ways to do this. The first one is fairly simple. We're going to use firm name. Okay, so the product data is information on the firm that owns those barcodes, and then the patent data as assignee, we can use that to match this data set. But, you know, this is very coarse, and you can imagine, you know, there are large firms potentially produce very distinct type of products. So they may patent in one type of product and not patent in the other. So in order to think about these cases, we actually going to use the second match that is way more direct, right? Where we're going to basically use leverage on techniques or text matching techniques, and we're going to link patents to products, okay? The way we do it fundamentally is think about the following. We cannot really match one-to-one, so a specific barcode to a specific patent. It is not possible in designing the large scale because a patent may affect many different products, and a product may benefit from different patents, okay? So instead, we're gonna use a mediator, which is grouping both the patents and the barcodes on what we call these product categories that I mentioned before, right? So this idea here is that these product categories will encompass similar products. And what we're gonna do is that we're gonna look at patent data and patent text, and then we're gonna assign those patents to different product categories using, you know, text analysis, document classification techniques. You know, there are a lot of details, really a lot about how to do this. You know, there are many decisions, many robustness, as you can imagine. So instead of like going over like the boring details of this, I want to give you an example such that we understand what is broadly done. So the first way, you know, think about match one is very simple. There's a company in our data set that is Procter & Gamble. Many of you probably hear it. You know, this company in the period 2006 to 2015 introduced almost 18,000 new products, okay? Simultaneously, in the same period, made almost 7,000 new patent applications. So that's match one, okay? What we're gonna do is that there is this, and we have annual data of these companies. So we split these products into the periods that they create the products and introduce the patents. Match two fundamentally is doing the following, like look at Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble offers products across very distinct product categories. Procter & Gamble produces deodorants, detergents, cosmetics, shaving, and so on. So what match two will do is exactly being able to split the patents that are, we're gonna say that they are associated with deodorants with product introduction in deodorants product category, and so on. So let me give you an example, for instance, how this actually works in terms of the matching procedure. So think about detergents, okay? So the detergents in our data set are, in the product data set, are described, say, as, you know, detergent, heavy duty, liquid, bleach. There are different descriptions of those products. We're gonna use, together with that, we're gonna match the technical words that come from Wikipedia. So think about the case of detergents. You know, we also want to measure things like the chemicals involved in the production of detergents. So the Wikipedia will give us those technical words. So with that, we're gonna build vectors word vectors that will represent these different product categories. Now let's go to the patent side, okay? So in the patent side, we're gonna use title and abstract, as well as patent classification and title of citing patents. And what we're gonna do is we build text that will describe those patents. And for each patent, we're gonna see how it compares with the text that describes all product categories that are in the product data, okay? And we're gonna choose the one that matches the best, basically, okay? So fundamentally, for instance, our algorithm at the end will say, for instance, you know, these around 1,000 Procter & Gamble patents that will have detergent, will have things like non-ionic detergent compositions or detergent composition comprising polymeric, will be matched to the product category detergents, okay? So once you have that, we have this unique data set that within firm category and time period will simultaneously measure product innovation, raw measure, novelty adjusted, and various measures of performance of these products in the market. And then patent information, right? Patent applications will be our baseline measure, but then we're gonna use granted, citations, and many other measures that people typically use, okay? So this is the core of our data set, is this match two that allows us to build this. So just a quick, you know, a summary of how you should think about our data set. We believe our data set is large scale and it covers really a large amount of products. So the products that this data set will cover are mostly non-durable and semi-durable. So think about lamps, toasters, and so on, okay? This covers about 40% of the US consumption of goods, okay? Moreover, the firms that we have in our data set, when we look at their patenting intensity and their product introduction intensity, they broadly compare with the manufacturing sector. You know, among the 35,000 firms that we cover, about 8% have at least one patent between the period 2006 to 2015, which is very comparable with others have reported for the entire manufacturing sector, like 6%, but substantially larger than the patent intensity of other sectors than manufacturing, right? So we believe it's representative of the manufacturing sector, but our firms patent substantially more than the average firm in the economy, okay? So there are many, you know, examples of these firms. I'm gonna jump right in and show you some of the results. In case is there any question that I should address now before I go into the results?
It looks like your co-authors are handling things, so I think we're good.
Great, that's why, great. Okay, so how about what we do with this data set at hand? We're gonna do the following. We're gonna put together what we call a list of facts that will summarize our empirical findings. Our first empirical fact is that we measure that a large amount of product innovation comes from firms that do not patent at all, okay? So look at this. When we measure innovation, product innovation in this sector, we have that 54% comes from firms that never use the patenting system, right? So then for those, we are sure that whatever are the innovation that they are doing, they do not patent those innovations, okay? And in fact, you can look at how that varies, you know, look at quality measures. You can actually see patenting firms in that product category. And this is really a lower bound of the amount of innovation that we have in this sector that is not captured by patent-based metrics, okay? Then the second fact it will show you is that, well, they miss a lot of innovation, but patents are positively associated with product innovation by patenting holding firms. So let me show you what we do for that. So consider this exercise. We're gonna look at product innovation before and after switching to patenting. So we're gonna use, our data set it's sufficiently large that we have quite a bit of firms that actually switch from never patenting. And we see that by tracking patents starting 75. So they didn't patent until then, and then they switch into patenting. So we're gonna look at these switchers, okay? And we're gonna look at what is happening simultaneously that they become patentees, what is happening to the product innovation. And we're gonna look at both new products and also quality adjusted new products, okay? And what I have here is that we do this dynamically, and you know, we can see, for instance, that patenting in the future doesn't seem to be changing product innovation now. But condition on patenting, say 1 year ago, we see that there is an increase in the intensity of product introduction, okay, of these firms. And we see that for here, when these lag one will say what is happening to product introduction in T+1 when the firm patents in T, becomes a patentee in T. And we see that that's associated with an increase in product introduction about 10%, okay? When we do the same for quality adjusted measures, we see similar patterns, the magnitudes differ, but similar patterns when we use the novelty adjusted measure of innovation. So this just to say that there is a correlation, an association between becoming a patentee, switching from non-patenting to patenting, and product innovation, okay? So I have to speed up a little bit. So the second margin that we use to look at the relationship between patenting and product introduction is that we instead now focus on the intensive margin of patenting. We basically look at how an increase in the amount of patents, patent applications and so on, is associated with an increase in product introduction, okay? And this will be captured by this elasticity, okay? And again, we have different legs, but here I'm gonna show you just one, which is what happens to product introduction in T+1, where you increase patenting in T. And we get this elasticity of about 0.04, which means that an increase in 10% in patents will lead to an increase in product introduction of 0.4, okay? And similar when we look at novelty adjusted. Importantly, we test how this relationship changes when we use different metrics of patents. And for instance, we see that this effect on the patent applications comes from granted and not for non-granted. And also it's more likely to be higher for citations and patents that have a lot of claims, okay? So what is our interpretation of these two facts, right? That there's a large amount of innovation that comes from firms that do not patent. Condition on patenting, patents are positively associated with product innovation. Well, our interpretation is that these results will be informative of the properties of patents as metrics of product innovation, right? It's saying that, well, yes, patents understate the amount of innovation, but they carry that productive signal of actual innovations in the market, on average for the unconditional firm in this sector, okay? Also, one important thing that we document is that these commonly used metrics of patent quality, like using granted or weighted by citations, they are more informative than simple counts. So those patents carry more that productive signal of actual innovation on the market. If there's no questions, I'm gonna now look at how the introduction of products in the market and the relationship of products with the patents, looking at the heterogeneity of firm size. So I'm gonna show you the following. Large firms actually have lower product innovation rates, but they have higher patents per new products. Let me show you how we do this, okay? So here it's a plot that has the rate of product introduction by firm size. And what we do here is that we look at firms of different size within sectors. So you see this effectively is looking firms market share. And we are doing this across the firm size distribution. And what we see, we have plot here is the product introduction rate. So the ratio of new products to the stock of products. And what we see is that large firms, okay, those over here, right? These firms have, say, the top quintile as an average of 16% a year of products introduced. And that's about double for firms that are really small, okay? So this is a substantially difference. And this is on the unweighted. When you actually account for the novelty adjusted product introduction rate, where you account for how novel are the products, then you actually see a bigger difference. And that's these are the right axis here, and the dark blue dots. We see that the quality adjusters of firms on the, say, top quintile, they introduce, say, 3 to 4% a year of novel products. This is 4 times larger for smaller firms, okay? So there's big difference here. Nevertheless, so large firms, they introduce relatively less new products, but they actually have a higher ratio of patent per new product. And we see that both on just like ratio of patents per new product and the quality adjusted, okay? This tells us that effectively, that elasticity of product introduction to patenting actually changes with firm size. And in fact, when we did this exercise where we re-estimated the elasticities before, but now splitting firms into groups by large and small, we see that there is a weakening in the elasticity of the relationship between patents and product introduction, okay? So there are many interpretations here, but we're gonna show you, we're gonna use further facts in the data to show, to indicate why is that there is this weakening relationship between patents and product introduction. So I'm gonna look at and gonna show you that patents of larger firms are associated with declines in competition in introduction of products by competitors. And let me show how we're gonna do this. So basically we look at market leaders, which in our product categories are firms that have between 20 to 80% of market share, okay? And we're gonna compare how their patenting and product innovation compares with the followers. And in particular here, we're gonna use a look at followers, product introduction, and we're gonna see how that responds to product introduction by leaders and patenting. So patenting, the key here is that we can look at how product introduction by followers respond to patenting by leaders conditional on their product introduction. And what we see, there is this negative association here. Sorry, this negative association here, right? Independent of how we control for this, that indicates that there is an association, negative association between introduction of new products by followers and patenting by leaders. We don't see this association when we reverse the roles here. When we look at product introduction by leaders and how that responds to patenting by followers, okay? Moreover, we also look at changes in revenue, and we look at revenue premium of these products, and we see how they respond to product introduction and patenting. And what we see in that, I don't have time to cover that in detail, but broadly what we see is that the revenue premium of patents is larger for larger firms, conditional on their product introduction, okay? So our interpretation is that this weakening of the relationship between patents and product introduction, it's consistent that these large firms are using patents also for protective reasons, right? And then patents actually carry that protective role, that signal that is not actually innovation on the market, but carries a protective role. And those patents are used to deter innovation, and they are used to make those firms grow more in the future, okay? So we're gonna complement these empirical patterns and our interpretation of these empirical patterns with a model, okay? And this helps us think throughout these mechanisms, why, and it gives us intuition for some of the patterns we see in the data. So this is a simple framework where we endogenize innovation and patenting, right? And what we are gonna do here is simply use a quality ladder growth model in the spirit of others. But here the unique feature says that we split the patenting decision from the product introduction decision. So these are two independent, or they are related, but they are two decisions here, okay? So that's kind of the uniqueness of this model. So the firm operates in the product space and the patent space, and they don't need to be exactly the same. So here, think about firms say a firm with an existing product quality, Q, and the firm has decided to, it comes as an idea to increase the quality, a blueprint to increase the quality of the product that offers in the market, okay? The firm, when it comes up with this idea, can do product innovation. So basically will develop that idea, commercialize that idea, introduce the new product in the market, okay? So that will make increase Q to Q prime, okay? Simultaneously, the firm can also decide to patent that idea. And what will the patent do? Well, the patent fundamentally will create a barrier for others to copy. And that effectively what it's doing is reducing the probability that an entrant or a follower will replace the incumbent firm. Okay, so effectively think about, in this model, we have this creative destruction rate. Effectively patenting allows the firm to reduce the probability that is replaced by an entrant. Okay, both of these are costly activities, both introducing, commercializing the product and also patenting. So how do you think about here in a nutshell, what we are doing is think about like condition on having that blueprint, then what are the gains from introducing that product in the market? Well, that will be an incremental profit that comes from selling higher quality products, okay? The issue here is that market leaders actually have lower incentives for product innovation. And the intuition is actually fairly simple. It's like similar to the arrow replacement effect. Because the firms are cannibalizing their own profits from their own existing product, then their incremental gain from increasing the quality of the products in the market, it's smaller relative to a smaller firm, where he has a lot to gain because it's not cannibalizing a lot. So these gains from introducing new products, they are positive, but they decline with firm size, okay? On the other side, we have market leaders that have higher incentives to engage in patenting. Why? They have a lot to lose, right? So they have high profitability in the market, they are big. If they patent, they reduce that probability that they are replaced by an entrant. And so the gain from patenting actually increase with the firm size. Okay, so this is kind of the intuition we have here. So at the end, our model, what we will deliver is that for firms that are relatively small, then actually the gains from product introduction may be large enough that the firm will be mostly product introduction and not patenting. Firms with an average size can do simultaneously patenting and product introduction. And then firms that are very large, they actually may just do patenting because they're really the incremental gain of doing product introduction is not enough to offset the cost of doing that, okay? So here kind of gives us an intuition of the model. So what we're gonna do is the following. We're gonna basically use the model to come up with what we call, in the spirit of the value of a patent, which in our case is simply the gross value of the profit from introducing the product and patenting relative to the profit of not introducing the product, not patenting, okay? And what we're gonna do is decompose this value of the patent in a component that is productive, that has to do how much of the profits come from increasing the quality of the product in the market and how much comes from the protection, how much of the gains come from reducing the probability of being replaced by entrants, okay?
5 minutes.
Yes. Productive, it's exactly in some way, it's really the incremental value of higher quality products. So it's the role of product introduction as a positive signaling of actual innovation on the market. Protective will be the protection role that the patent will give. So what we're gonna do is the following. We're gonna calibrate the parameters using size, patenting, and sales growth relationships in the data. And we're gonna quantify how this patent value changes with firm size, okay? And here is what we find. So we have the patent value, and we look at how that changes with firm relative size, which is this x-axis. And what you see here is that, at red, we have the protective role. And we see clearly that, basically that value, because firms have a lot to lose, it's growing with firm size. On the other side, we have the gray area, which is the productive. And we see because of firms that when they are small, they have a lot to gain from increasing the quality of their products. But when they are larger, the quality is smaller. So we can see here that the share of protection, the share of this protective role of patents is larger for larger firms, okay? So these dual, it basically saying that firms the patents can be explored differently by firms. So as a conclusion, what we do in this paper is the following. We basically build a data set that has really direct measures of patents and products. And we can do analysis within firm by looking at how much they have within product category. This allows us to look at regressions in a very direct way, right? We are able to look at increases in patents within product category with increases in product introduction in those same product categories. Okay, we look at this relationship, and fundamentally we use about like how this relationship changes with firm heterogeneity, when with larger firms versus smaller firms, and we use those differences to make an interpretation of why is it that there is the value of the relationship between patents and product introduction varies with firm size. And we use a model then to quantify how much of the protective value of patents versus the positive signal of patents as a measure of innovation. And this, you can think about like, this is important even from a measurement perspective, it can inform the properties of patents. But also when you think about fundamentally, we typically look at things for models. We look, for instance, in policy, the relationship between R&D and patents. But fundamentally, we care whether this R&D actually leads to new products for the consumers. So our elasticities that relate patents to product introduction can help get at a closer measure of what actually policy may target. Thank you. This is what I have for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So our discussant is Laurent Fresard, who is from USI. You've got 15 minutes. I'll start the timer. Just unmute.
Okay, can you see my screen? It's working now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot for the organizer to inviting me to think about this this paper, and thank you, Sara, for a very good presentation. So let me tell you about this paper. So I think it's very impressive. So Sara's presentation made it sound like an easy task, but it's not. So there's an incredible amount of work that went into it. So they really got their hands dirty. And so this was not for nothing, because I think it provides the paper and the result provide very novel and relevant insights. So let me, take a big picture here. So, innovation should lead to productivity growth. I mean, so that's what we would read in a typical paper that use patents, including my own. And so we all believe that's true, and it's probably true. So if you look at, aggregate trends, so what you would see here on the left, I'm just, plotting from Fred's, labor productivity. And so what you see is that since the last 10 years, I mean, it's not a novel fact, I mean, it's well known. Since the last 10 years, there is clear slowdown in productivity growth. But if you look at the right-hand side, which is the number of patents granted every year by the USPTO, you see that starting from 2010, there is a big increase. Okay, so these trends, they don't seem to add up. And so what is going on? So one interpretation, and this actually might be true, maybe it just takes a very long time for real innovation to show up in productivity. Another possibility is that maybe patents are not so great measures of innovation, and especially after 2010. So if that's the case, maybe that's not such a big deal. Maybe it's just a call for us researchers that we should maybe not rely on patents so much as a measure of innovation. But then there's number 3, that's the following, that maybe not even it's not only the case that patent might not be a good measure, but actually may cause productivity to slow down. And this would happen if there is, strategic patenting or excess patenting, firms using patenting strategies to deter entry and innovation. And if that's the case, if there's really a causal effect here, then it's a bigger problem. And then, you start thinking about what should be done, if anything, maybe, changing the patent system and so on. And so this paper really goes after 2 and 3. And so this is clearly not the first paper to try to, to dig into that space. But I think the distinct feature of that paper is that they do have large-scale evidence. And I think this is great. And this is something Sara insisted a lot. So I think the key contribution is really mapping patents to product innovation in a consumer good. And I think this is incredibly useful. So if you take this perspective that innovation should translate into new or better products, then it's a very good way to try to capture that. And then you're going to come up with 2 results. So the first result is that there is a positive correlation between patent and product innovation. That's good news. So, what we use as measure is actually measuring something. The bad news is that it's not great. It's not huge. This correlation is nowhere close to 1. Well, it's not that surprising, but the magnitude of that could be a little surprising. So the second main result of the paper is that, and I think that's probably where the results are the most relevant, is that there might be evidence of strategic patenting that deters innovation. And in particular, they show that size seems to matter. And because this is large-scale evidence, this could be pretty important and scary. So I have, lots of different comments, but 3 main comments and suggestions. So first, I'm going to talk about whether this context is really adequate to make these claims, and I think it is. But I think it would be good for the authors to clarify 1 or 2 things. Then, second, there might be a worry of some measurement error in the textual mapping, and I would try to encourage the author to prove me wrong. And I don't think that's an issue, but I think it would be good to clear that. And then I would try to encourage the authors to try to tweak their test a little bit to try to provide a little more evidence on this idea of strategic patenting. Okay, so here they focus on innovation in consumer good. So now, of course, that's what they have. It's clearly not an ideal setting to study the link between patent innovation and productivity. So simply because most of these products, if you think about, the product they have, toothpaste or, a detergent and so on, they're clearly not, the ones that are going to necessarily increase productivity. So if you think about on the theory side, models that view innovation as the expansion of, product offering, they typically tend to focus on offerings in the intermediate good markets, where firms can actually increase these use as inputs and trying to grow like that. So I don't think it's a problem for that paper, but I think it would be good to try to clarify a little bit in order to clarify the message. Also, it could be that patents does not necessarily offer a very strong protection in some of these markets. For instance, there is very few patents associated with food products, just because it's very difficult to defend. So if you look at some of the surveys that they've been done, it doesn't really work well. So the question I have is really, what can we generalize about this low correlation or this positive correlation between patent and innovation? So we kind of want to know how representative this sample is. And so I think they can do, different things. So one thing could be done is to, simply check heterogeneity across markets. So here they have, product categories. So I think it would be interesting to see the magnitude of this correlation, for instance, in, drugs versus food versus cosmetics. Just try to, to help us researchers try to see, when is it that, these patent counts are probably a good measure, and when is it that it's probably not a good measure. So that would be very helpful. So another thing that you could do, this would require you to get your hands more dirty even. So would maybe try to map patents to trademarks. So it might not be perfect. So there might be a short, textual description. So the text might be slim, but at least you would have a sample of firms covering different industries, and in particular intermediate goods. So it could give you a sense about whether the result that you have in these consumer good markets are, can generalize a little bit. So that would be useful. So in terms of the mapping, so this is very impressive. I have to say, I've worked with text in patents and text analytics, so I think you do a very good job. So I don't have a lot of complaints on that. So the task is difficult simply because just from a conceptual perspective, this is clearly not one-to-one, as you clearly explained. One patent can be used in multiple products, and a product can use multiple patents. So another difficulty is that if you look at Nielsen, probably I haven't access to the data, but I tend to think that the product text is thin. So I think it was a very good idea to complement that with Wikipedia. So it's very, very clever. So at the end of the day, what you have, you're going to assign patents to one product category coming from this clustering algorithm. And then you're going to look for the highest similarity. And then you're going to create this one-to-one mapping so that at the end you have a unit of observation that is a firm category time. So I think this is very useful. So now, as I said, the mapping is very well done. So you provide lots of robustness tests. So my suggestion to help with understanding how representative this sample could be, I think it would be very useful to provide some examples. So you did that in the presentation. So I think this should be in the text. This would be helpful. So I think summary stats could be helpful. So I ask you some. So we'd like to know about, how many words I used. We'd like to know the patent innovation intensity by category, the quality of the mapping, so the similarity scores by category and so on. I think that would be helpful, for the reader that not necessarily, an expert in text analytics, so, to kind of help visualize what you do. So now I don't know if you realize that, but actually what you do is a big business. So there are many firms out there that are providing services that are, linking patents to products. So I think it would be, potentially interesting to try to reach out to some of them, try to see how you compare. So now the reason why these markets exist is that you have, law firms try to see, how likely is it that the patent is breached or is used, illegally by others. So there's these growing industries that try to litigate. So they've done some of the work. So that might be something that you want to look at. So the main potential problem I see with your implementation is that there might be a bias. And so this bias could come from the fact that the mapping between the text in patents and the text in product might not be homogeneous by size. So why would that be? It could very well be that, smaller firms or firms that are not market leaders might use, shorter or less product descriptions. They might have patents that are not as complete because they don't have necessarily the money to hire the top lawyers to file this patent. It could also be that small firms will have multi-category patents, patents that could be used in multiple products. So clearly, if you have that, you're going to have a truncation when you force your algorithm to be a one-to-one mapping. And so if that's the case, what could happen in data is that what you show is that, large firms have more patent per product, but this could actually be just a downward bias. If the mapping is not homogeneous by size, then you would not necessarily have the right patent for a unit product. And so this is potentially a problem because this is a measure that you use for all the tests. So now, a simple idea I had is that you could use the similarity scores that you produced. I mean, you've done all that work, getting your hand very dirty. So the way to think about the similarity score is, a confidence level. How confident that you are that the mapping between a product of a given firm and a patent is accurate. So my intuition is that if there is a measurement error, it's very likely to be positively correlated with this similarity score. So this means that one way to rule out my concern would be to try to either use weighted RLS or to try to exploit these similarity scores in some of your tests, or to try to scale some of the measures by the similarity score. Another way to prove me wrong, and I think I'm wrong, but I just want to clear that, is to check whether there is homogeneity in the similarity scores, or whether the ratio of matched patent to non-matched patent is not affected by the size distribution. If you can show that, I think that would be really, really helpful. Okay, so the last part of the discussion is really on this idea that firms are using patents to block innovation, and so this is something that's everywhere in the news. So this notion of over patents, overpriced, and I think this is very strong in the drug industry, where the cost of drug is going through the roof, and you see that most of these drug companies are using lots and lots of patents for each product. So I think this really fits the intuition that you have in your results. And so this is a serious problem that is really crying for large-scale evidence. And I think you have all the elements to make a really big contribution here. And so you report two types of evidence. One is that you show that conditional on the number of new products that you introduce on the market, small firms don't make that much additional sales per the stock of patent they have. And this is not the case for large firms, okay? Suggesting that the portfolio of patents of large firms has an incremental effect on sales beyond the new product that they add. And so the evidence number 2 is that you show at the market level that when leaders have more patents in the past, then this leads, or at least this is correlated with less product introduction. So now the question I have is, I believe the result. So the question is this really excessive patenting? When I say excessive, is from a social perspective, okay? Too much patent for the innovation you have. And I think the paper could be potentially straightened on that dimension. So some possible sanity checks I think would be useful to show or to try to look at whether the market leaders are profitable. Okay, so you really want them to see whether they actually make profits and not only increasing scales by having more sales. It would be useful to look at whether these extra sales come from higher prices or lower quantities, or whether there's any evidence of market power in these markets. So I think you also want to rule out the possibility of capturing, aggregate booms and bust cycles, where the big firms are starting to introduce the products, and then the small firms are late in the game, irrespective of whether they are blocked or not. They're just late in the game, and then naturally you would see less product introduction by these firms. So I think it would be interesting to run some dynamic tests, with leads and lags. So this could be good sanity checks. So now what I was not really clear about is why you do all these tests at the market level. So my intuition tells me that it would make more sense to use firm level tests. And so the reason why I'm saying that is that, it seems to me that there is a lot of, the obsolescence is fast in these markets. Okay, so the product cycles should be short and are very likely to be heterogeneous across firms. And so my intuition tells me that it would be useful to exploit this heterogeneity. So the way I would think about it is that you could look at firm level regressions and try to see, for instance, whether the probability that a small firm introduces a new product at a given point in time is a function of the patents of leaders and the product of leaders. Basically, flip your market level analysis to firm level analysis. And so the reason why I think it could be very useful is that you could potentially try to see where this deterrence effect is the strongest. So I would believe, for instance, that it would be probably stronger in specific areas like drugs. So maybe it's going to be stronger in mature markets, in markets where there is high patenting, where patents are really protective of IP, where there's more litigation, okay, where maybe firms are smaller, or where firms experience shorter product cycles. So I think all these are within reach. And so this could be twofold. So first, they would enable you to have a better characterization of these protective patents and the protective role of patents. And to a lower extent, it would help with the identification. I don't think you have an identification problem. I don't think this is an identification paper, and I think that's great like that. But I think you would benefit from having a better characterization of these potential excessive patents. So you don't need to change the model. I don't think it's necessary. I think you can fit that in the current framework. I don't see that as a problem. Okay, so my last comment, which is a bit of let's say wishful thinking somehow. I would like to know, just for my own consumption, what are these patents that deter innovation? And I think it would be very useful if you can try to identify them ex ante. So do we expect this blocking patent to have any specific textual particularity? Do we expect them to have more claims, to have more words, to have more, to be longer, or to have specificity in the language? Another thing that I would like to know is whether these blocking patents have high textual similarities with some focal patents, and I think they should have. Right? Because if you want to block, you kind of block on something that already exists. It'd be also useful to see whether they cluster in time. I think if you could come up with one way, even if it's not super precise, but one way to tell us ex ante in advance whether some patents are very likely to block future innovation, I think that would be very useful for us researchers, but also for for policymakers. And I think you can do that without going too fancy in terms of the NLP algorithm that you could use. You could start simple, but I think this is something you can do maybe in this paper or another. At least I would be very interested to see something like this. Okay, so in conclusion, I think it's a very important paper. There are two levels of novel insight. One is on the ability of using patents as a way to measure innovation and whether that varies across industries, across markets, across innovation. And so this evidence on the potential of excessive patenting is really important, and it has the potential, I think, to affect us researchers and policymakers as well. So I think it could be even more impactful, in my opinion, if you would clarify a little bit how generalizable the results are. Can I take these results and go from there, or whether I should interpret that with a little bit of a caveat. I think it would be very useful if you could rule out this bias mapping, especially by sides. This would make the results more credible, in my opinion. And I think I would encourage you to potentially work on some simple tests to strengthen this notion that some of the patterns that firms use are really there to deter entry, and whether this is socially harmful and by how much. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for a great discussion. Sara, do you want to respond to any of those comments? We got 5 minutes or so.
Yes, I would like to. I thank you so much for the comments. It's really good to have someone like going over the materials and give us some insights of how can we make the paper clearer or improve our analysis. Here, let me kind of go over like the 3 parts, and just to give you some thoughts of how do we view, are we concerned with some of the points you made, and whether we plan to do some of that. So let me, in terms of the representativeness of the consumer, of this sector. So we call this the consumer goods sector, which basically includes non-durables like food, and semi-durables, things like lamps, toasters, printers, and so on. Okay. So in terms of, one thing is that the size of this sector is relatively large, right? So it is 14% of the consumption of goods in the US. Okay. And on that, like, we think our data set is pretty good at measuring that consumption. But of course, as you said, manufacturing sector includes, more types of products. In particular, we can think about durables and intermediate products that may be quite important. One thing that makes us think that this is fairly representative of the overall manufacturing sector is the following. One is that these firms are actually very patent intensive, right? So this is not like, oh, this is food, is not patentable. No, like these firms actually have a patenting intensity within, it's slightly actually larger than the average firm in the manufacturing sector. So these firms do use patents a lot. Okay, and then we see enough. One thing that we use, and you also made this suggestion, is that we have distinct product categories, and we look at these product, the things from like more like food into things that are a little bit more durable, and we look at how that elasticity, how the results change. And perhaps we should bring more of that into the paper. We have a bunch of results exactly on thinking, well, there are some product categories that are more patentable by nature than others, right? So you're likely to be less patentable in food, and that's true. We see that, right? We don't see so many, we found many patents of strawberries and so on, but it's less likely versus, things that are more on the durable spectrum. So we have some of that, and in line, we thought the results were kind of as expected, so we didn't bring much of it, but you're making me think that perhaps it will be something that our readers will be happy to see more of that. So we can do bring some of that. This relative to the matching, absolutely. So this is a big, we have a big machinery built in with many decisions to make that at the end we match patents to product categories, right? This is actually, unique to we developed this machinery. And of course, one thing throughout, this paper took a long time, exactly because throughout this process, we had to think carefully about these decisions, because exactly one concern that we had is it that we potentially are, with our match procedure, will we bias the results in some way, right? And one concern that we had, like you said, it's exactly to the extent that we may, like if the match in some way makes that we are less likely to match for smaller firms versus larger firms or something like that, that will potentially bias the results. So we did a bunch of we did a bunch of exercises. The first thing that we did was like, we always compare with the match one that doesn't use, the text similarity, right? We just looked at total patterns, and we always check that at least the patterns we have are in line. And we didn't find any of our facts that will like be different if we use the match 2 versus the match 1. The match 2 is just like better and gives us a very direct link. And so that's why we keep it. Then the other thing that we do is we look at match statistics by firm size by the distribution. And so we didn't find any systematic bias, but I like your suggestion on potentially building confidence error. So we can do more of that. And I have to say that a lot, because this is a massive algorithm. We have a lot of those pieces not even available. There are a lot of information that we by now gather that is not available to our reader. And you're making us think that we should show more of that robustness to the firm size, to potentially the bias in the paper. So we're gonna potentially add on that. And then you mentioned these additional results that we found, like exactly, can we use more variation in the data? And can, one of the things, you gave us great examples. We did look just at these market regressions, right? So as you said, we look at market leaders, the reaction function relative to the followers and so on. So we were a little inspired by the IO literature and coming up with those regressions. But I do like, the firm level analysis, we have few things done, but you gave us great ideas. So other things that we can do, even potentially in an additional paper, because I think, you will make the picture potentially a little bit more complete and eventually have more insights. So some of that, for sure, it's worth exploring. One thing also that I wanted to mention is that about like this, can we look at these patterns by market leaders, and can we actually, look at examples? Can we actually verify that these are likely to be associated with protective role? We did a bunch of things. So we found many examples. We have like maybe 2 or so in the paper. We have this, Driscoll's, this company that has massive amount of patents, and we don't see that introducing in products. We, this idea that they're like sleeping patents, right? They patent, but they actually never do. They just have them. We call, people have been calling them sleeping patents. We found a bunch of them, which we are like clearly, it's very easily to do that match. We also see patents that are very broad, that just protecting so much, like that there is really no, that there is no way that there is other patents that follow on that, because they are really too broad. It may be useful to add some of more systematic analysis on that, and we did something. So for instance, we did this exercise. We compare, which is similar to some of things you described, but not exactly. So we basically did the following. We compared text of patents by market leaders, so patents between them. So things that we did is like, we look at similarity between patents for market leaders and followers, and we see that like patents of market leaders are more similar between them than patents of followers. So we did a bunch of other statistics that were exactly to think, do we see systematic evidence that patents of market leaders in some way are poorer quality, have less citations, they are more similar between them? And we found, I think, right now we're convinced that, we can make a strong claim that that's the case. So that's what, I thank you so much. I think there are other, looking at potential focal patterns and so on. These are things that, really food for thought. We can really try to potentially use the algorithm a little further and do some additional exercises. So thank you.